continuity, but just remember that we have lots of very capable members that we would love to have present at any time. We've got a few lined up coming up this summer. And one of our presenters is actually on the line, Bill Tyler, who will be presenting, I think he's in June. So that will be the next one. And WeCo is a group of digital technologists. To work on digital accessibility at WeCo, you have to have the talent of actually living with a disability. So many of us, in fact, all but one person in our company right now lives with some form of disability. So that is kind of where we come from. Next slide. So we start out usually with some announcements about the meetup. We are now, as Andy said, meeting online because of the global pandemic. And so realizing that this is a change for many of our members who are used to coming to our Minneapolis office, please let us know if there is anything you need. If you need any adjustments with accessibility, if anything is not working out for you, that is what Andy is there for. And you can contact him via chat tonight. We'll be giving you, and also you can contact him through the MeetUp webpage as well. And you can always speak up. If you can't type in the chat box, speak up, that's fine. This is a small group. So this marks, let's see, we are about 4 or 5 months into a conversion to paid membership for this group. This group had been around for about 3 years that was just simply a free meetup group. And our company, WeCo, had been basically putting up a lot of the costs, doing all the coordination. So the membership fees that we request are pretty nominal. And were we at $50 a year, Andy, for membership? I think that's right, isn't it? Yeah, $50 a year. Or you can also come in and pay $20 per meeting if you'd like. But you do get to try a meeting or two for free when you sign up so that you can decide. But this just simply helps us defray the cost of paying Andy and different things that we do to make this possible. WeCo is the default organization that keeps it going, but we really depend upon the input and knowledge of our members. And just an announcement that Global Accessibility Awareness Day 2020 is coming up this next month. It will be Thursday, May 21st. If you're not aware of what Global Accessibility Awareness Day is, it is an event that goes on all over the world to draw attention to digital accessibility for people living with disabilities. And it is something that at WeCo we celebrate every year. This year, our Global Accessibility Awareness Day will be held online, and it will be Thursday, May 21st from 3:30 to 5. And this year, typically we've done a lot of device demonstration and get inside the head of the user who lives with disabilities. But this year, we're devoting it more to what do we do in a world that has to become very, very digital to work for business, for entertainment, for promotion, in which things have to be accessible. So accessibility in the age of COVID is going to cover things like, how do you make sure that your remote meetings are accessible? How do you accommodate the needs of a coworker who lives with disabilities that now needs to work online? How do you promote events? How do you promote products to a wider audience entirely digitally if you're used to having in-person events or in-person interaction with customers? So it's going to be a very, very different, we call GAD event, and it is free, open to the public, and the registration will be released this week, so watch for it. The art of the alt tag is today's topic, and what we're going to be covering is probably pretty basic stuff for some of you, but it might be introductory for others. What is an alternative text tag? What does it mean? What are the WCAG requirements? We won't be going into these exhaustively. It'll just be an introduction. And then we're going to share with you some nuances of how you apply alt tags. Here at WeCo, we use kind of an always tag approach. We'll be talking about that, short versus long alt tags. And then we're just going to open it up for discussion, because I know that some of you came specifically tonight because you're working on alt tag projects. This way we'll be able to take your questions and answer those. Okay. So let's start out with talking about what is an alternative text tag. Next slide. So this is a definition that I came up with from WebAIM. If you're not familiar with the organization, WebAIM is a web accessibility group here in the United States that is federally funded. So essentially they're your website accessibility group. They're paid for you with your tax dollars. We work with them very closely at WeCo. We often call them and ask them things, and they're super helpful groups. So we do lean on them a lot for knowledge. And their definition is an alternative text provides text alternative to non-text content in web pages. The most common application is alternative text for images, though the principles can be applied to media, applets, and other non-text web content. And we'll be going into some of that detail next. Okay. So what we like to think about regarding an alt tag at WeCo is that it is non-visual access to what is visual. And at WeCo, we have a tendency to describe people that fall into site-related disability category as non-visual or minimal visual users. But what we're trying to do with an alt tag is paint a picture in the mind of the user of what people who have vision are able to take in. We're trying to make sure that they receive the same information that everyone else receives, and recognize that we all learn in different ways. Many of us are visual users, and may I add on that when we lose our sight, that doesn't necessarily mean that we lose the desire or need to learn visually, and alt tags enable us to get around that. There we go. Visual information is also really, really impactful. And so we often are cautioning clients to not assume because someone doesn't have their vision that they aren't interested in the details of an image. It's important to remember that many of us, when we become blind, have the benefit of having had vision at one point in our lives, and being able to remember what color is, or being able to remember what a sunset looks like. So it's important to realize it's a very important thing to do to alt tag. Next. Oh, having some trouble with the advancing. There we go. So this is a list of all the types of alt text that there is, types of images. And most of these are pretty self-explanatory. I won't go into all of them, but informative is probably the one that most of us think about. That's just like the paint cans on the slide that came before this one. It adds something, it adds some kind of information, it adds some kind of dimension to the story that we're telling today. But there are also sometimes images that are purely decorative. Those could be just like a separation bar between paragraphs. Functional images of text, more complex images, will be going into those. Images in groups and image maps. So these are all the different types of things that we might want to use an alt text tag for. Next. So let's take a quick look at the WCAG requirements, because they really tell us where this lies in regards to the law and what expectations are of the public. So there are 3 different levels of web content accessibility guideline. Level A is usually the most basic and easiest to attain. Level AA is a little bit harder. Most of the laws around the world are subscribing to AA, including in the United States. And level AAA is usually the most inclusive, but can also be a little bit more challenging. So we just took the basic success criteria that Web Content Accessibility Guidelines suggests and kind of broke it down into these 3 little boxes. So for level A of non-text content, all non-text content has to have a text alternative that serves an equivalent purpose. So that means if you've got an image, it needs to have a description of what it is. Image of text, level AA, if technology is used, it can achieve the visual presentation. Text can be used to convey information instead of images of text. And we're going to be giving you examples of this in the next slide, so don't worry. Images of text, level AAA. Images of text are used only for decoration or where a particular presentation of text is essential to the information being conveyed. So let's look at examples of these because they can be kind of confusing. So these examples were all taken from success criteria specific example list I actually condensed and downloaded from the WCAG. Real easy to find in just a Google search. So these are examples of non-text content, and there's quite a list here, but I just cherry picked a couple that are pretty common. One non-text example is that a data chart, and a data chart is something that conveys an immense amount of detail. And when I was actually started my career in accessibility working at the Minnesota Department of Transportation, this was a lot of what I wound up tagging in reports. And it can convey numerous amounts of detail that can be sometimes hard for a visual user to take in. But these are something that we're going to want to tag. And we're going to talk about different ways that we can tag those. Then the next is, flip over to my notes. This is a linked thumbnail image. So you'll see these on websites where the image looks like a button that you're pressing or something, and it's linking you, taking you somewhere. It's really common for us to do this with social media icons on websites. So this is another thing that we're going to have to remember that has a visual element that we're going to want to tag.
Walter.
Somebody trying to say something? Okay. All right. So for the level AA, images of text examples, and this is just one, there is a list, would be when we do a call out quote, and it might be, a website that is very content dense, and this is a call out quote that's wanting to draw visual attention to something that's important in that text. And so realizing that even though it looks like writing to us, it is an image and it needs to be tagged. And one more AAA example. This was something I just found through a really random Google search. I have no idea what the store is, but this is a logo containing text. In fact, almost the entire logo is text. So sometimes we look at things like this and we go, okay, that's words. I don't need to alt tag that. But when it comes across as something that is a part of a visual, we're going to need to alt tag that. An easy way to think about this is it's not part of the HTML. A screen reader isn't going to be able to detect it. So it essentially is an image, even though it is mostly words. So a lot of what we're doing with alt text is realizing that what is classified as visual isn't always clear cut. And those of us that work in accessibility don't always have the luxury to know exactly how screen readers operate all the time. Sometimes we're going through our day. I mean, I remember when I started in accessibility and I used to have engineers dump reports on my desk and say, make it accessible in a week. And, and I was getting through things really quickly. It wasn't always easy to remember all of the detail of this. So that's why it's a good time to take a look at this. Next slide. So just a few items on the nuances of alt tagging and putting it into practice. At WeCo, we really believe that it's important to always alt tag, even if you think that it's something that, you know what, it's got a caption under it, it's fine. And that's because in working with a lot of clients, we find that clients that try to find exceptions to alt tagging really can confuse their staff. And it's not always easy for people to, make those decisions on the fly. So we recommend to our clients to always tag. It creates a practice process and it's easier to monitor. Now that is my personal opinion as your speaker tonight, but it is not something that everyone does. Next. This is probably the question we get asked about more than any: short and long alt tags. When do we use them? So I remember a long time ago teaching one of our first classes in accessible documents at a conference, and one of the people that was teaching with me is one of our board members who is blind. And he was saying, you know what, I really, really like a short alt tag because I just want to read it and be done and move on. And there was somebody else in the audience who was also blind who got up and said, I want the most information that I could possibly get from an alt tag. So it's really difficult to be able to determine the length of an alt tag because user preference is going to be very, very different. But for most images that we use every day, for instance, on a website or a document, a short alt tag suffices if the image is not complicated, if it provides very basic information. If you have a more complex image, like the chart that we showed earlier on the slides that has a lot of information in it, it's going to be probably necessary for you to construct a more complex or longer alternative text tag for that. It's really something that you have to decide based upon what does your audience need, how are they going to consume this. Now at MnDOT, we knew that most of the people who were reading much of the documents that we were putting out were the general public, and some of the detail that I could have put in there that engineers were telling me was probably more than the audience needed to know. So we were able to make some decisions about that, but it may be different for you. And I think that a lot of organizations develop their own protocol on how to apply these. Next slide. So that was just my little introduction on alt tags. And I know that we had some things come up through the chat box. I apologize, I didn't read everything. And I will read these out. These are from Glenn Walker, and thank you, Glenn. Slide note regarding AAA, W3.org says, note 2, it is not recommended that level AAA conformance be required as a general policy for entire sites because it is not possible to satisfy all level AAA success criteria for content. It's good to know, thank you. And then he also added images of text. WCAG 1.4.5 says to try to avoid images of text if possible and use real text with CSS. There are some exceptions to the rules such as company logos. And if you must have an image of text, definitely go with Lynn's recommendation of having alt text that matches the text of the image. Thank you. So with that, we will open it up for questions or comments. Are there any big alt tag puzzles that you've been wondering about?
I have a question.
Okay, Liz?
So at the Walker, we're working on a project to get alt tags on all of our collection images. And the thing that I think is the most complicated as we're starting to describe these is kind of dealing with gender and race and ethnicity in doing the descriptions. I don't know if anyone has any sort of, we've come up, you know, I've done some research and come up with some best practices, but if anyone has any thoughts on that, that'd be really helpful for us.
That's a really great question. I think that what we've been doing at WeCo, you know, we do our own alt tagging. We haven't run into lots of concern about that, but I know that we sat down with all of our staff at one point late last year and recommended that they do an inclusive signature line, but we did not require them to. We left that up to them. Mm-hmm. We educated them about, you know, why you might want to. And I include an additional one in mine. I include person or professional living with a disability. Mm-hmm. Partly because I believe that I don't believe living with a disability is a bad thing. So mm-hmm. It's not something I want to hide. But yeah, I think that for us, you know, the application of a wider range of gender, race, and ethnicity recognition to us is a great thing, because we really understand that being hidden or excluded as a group of people living with disabilities. So that's great. Would you like to share what kind of protocol you've developed around that?
Sure, yeah, so we've gotten lots of resources from other museums that are doing similar projects. And it seems like people recommend describing skin color so that you're not making an assumption that, you know, all skin color is white unless you describe it. So our protocol is going to be that we always describe skin color. And the protocol is like light skin tone, medium dark skin tone, and goes on from there. So we'll do that. And we're not going to assume race or ethnicity unless it's really important to the content of the image, which sometimes it is with art. But then we want to make sure that it's culturally agreed upon too, and that you're not making an assumption as a person making the description. And as far as gender, in general, we're going to use person or figure or they, them. And again, making an exception if it were culturally agreed upon and important to understanding the image.
I was going to say that too, that a lot of our tagging through WeCo is a person is wearing this or a person is doing that. And we try to really stay away from a man or a woman. Yeah, try to keep it wider.
Yeah.
I think one of the challenges that you faced working for the Art Museum is that one of the aspects of success criteria 111 is sensory experience. And since art, all forms of it, is really strongly determined by a sensory experience, it's difficult to do in just a few words what's going on. It's like, how do you describe what might be in any, you know, how would you describe the Mona Lisa in a meaningful way? Smiling woman face, you know, looks out of with a from the frame with a nature background. Is that going to accurately describe all the words that have ever been described or used to describe the Mona Lisa? Same with about any other piece of art. And it gets more complex when you talk about something that's abstract art, or What happens if you're describing the photograph of a sculpture? So, you know, you and those of you who are working in an art museum do face a lot of extra challenges, not only just describing it, but, you know, describing it to try to give that, you know, that real sense. And I think that's where offhand I would imagine you're going to leverage a lot of, you know, art history or art critics' comments to try to, you know, influence what you would put in your descriptions.
Yeah, definitely. That's another big issue that we've run into is how do you describe like a mood of something but not be subjective about it, you know? I just think it's a balance, I guess. And we're starting with doing short alt text and then hoping to add some long descriptions, and the long descriptions are where you really get into that, and yeah, it gets more complicated.
Yeah, I mean, another part of it is like if the kid, you know, it's like another part with art. Since my wife's an artist, I've been to many art museums around the world, including the ones locally. But if the key thing is trying to describe the difference between the different styles of the painting, so it's like, oh, how do I describe Degas versus Picasso versus Van Gogh? I mean, you have all of those challenges too. It's like, okay, what is it you want to describe? I think that may be one where it's a matter of context. Are you just trying, is the experience supposed to be just, you know, what experiencing the art as a layperson does going through a museum, or are you in an education mode where you're trying to describe the difference of the techniques that are involved? You know, it's like, okay, this is watercolor, this is oil, this is different kinds of canvas or things like that.
Yeah, definitely.
You said you had some of the bigger challenges for, you know, say I work for Optum and United Health Group, and so our problems are more data visualizations and charts. But you've got one of those nuanced areas with the sensory experience, which typically in business is not one of the things that you face all the time. But it's interesting to hear, you know, what you face as challenges, since it is part and parcel of what your groups do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was just chatting with Liz a little bit before we got started that WeCo has been actually over at Bell Museum and talking to them about us helping out with vetting some kiosk displays and things for accessibility. And there's a couple of different museums that we've talked to off and on. And I really actually, I get kind of geeky excited about kind of the challenge of that, because I grew up, my parents taking me to museums, me taking my daughter, but I think that there is such kind of a brave new world of challenge and of inclusion in museums that is really going to be fun to watch it unfold. And yeah, it's going to be a brain bender, but I think it's going to be fun to see what happens. So
yeah, it's been a super interesting project to work on so far. I've learned a lot. So.
Cool. Anybody else on the call from a museum? So I knew we had a couple of museums in town working on alt tag projects, so that's how we got to here tonight. So.
Hi, I'm Kristen. I also work at the Walker with Liz, so we're working on the same project. But yeah.
Great. Do you have any insights to share or questions?
Yeah, kind of like we were just talking about before, especially because like we're kind of getting into the process of feeling out like what, you know, writing of the alt tags are, and kind of like, yeah, how do you describe some of like the more abstract pieces that are in our collection and stuff. And really that's kind of, at least me personally, kind of at the start of this, just kind of figuring out how to, you know, accurately describe that and stuff. I think that's interesting part of it I didn't really foresee in it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. When I was at MnDOT, I worked with, I created a process for them to convert about 10,000 documents on the website that had been put up years and years to accessible formats. And we had a group that obviously hadn't created the documents, that was doing the conversion. And they had a lot of questions about alt tags. So we created a decision process to help them kind of decipher, how do I describe something I really don't know a lot about? I was really excited when I was researching for this presentation that the W3C actually has a decision tree that I've got linked up on the next slide on and it's on their website. It's easy to find, but we put a couple of resources regarding alt tags on the slides here that'll go out to you guys. But yeah, I was excited to see that they had done that too. So there's, I think, any way that we can, and a lot of what we do at WeCo is we try to, we're very process driven. So everything, it's like, how do we break this down into a process so we can replicate it so other people can do it so it becomes easy. And I think that's the tough thing about alt tags, because there is so much nuance, and it's always kind of the fun challenge to see how far you can get it down the process trail too. So great. So I had a comment here from Glenn Walker. He says, for screen reader users, the alt text of an image cannot be scanned like regular text on a page, right? For example, regular text can be navigated word by word or character by character using special screen reader shortcut keys, but alt text can only be read as a full sentence. While you can stop the screen reader in the middle of reading an alt text, you can't have it continue reading where it left off. Nor can you read the alt text word by word. That's one reason short alt text is preferable. If long alt text is needed, it's often better to have a caption assigned with the image, because captions can be read by word. I'm wondering, of the screen reader users we have on tonight, is that your experience of an alt tag?
This is Maureen. I'm a screen reader and braille display user, and yeah, because I'm usually like reading down the page and down arrowing. So when you down arrow with the screen reader, you'll read line by line, and it's hard to stop it once it's going. So
okay.
I like it when they're shorter, and you know, I think if you want to ever see some, like, if you're wondering, you know, what kind of ways to describe things and words, just turn on the SAP on your TV and watch some of the audio described shows and see how they will describe something. Like, I was watching something last night and it said they looked at the flag determinedly or something like that, and you could just kind of picture how their faces were looking, and it was like 5 words that described that.
That's a good tip.
I'm sorry, Lynn, really quick.
Oh, go ahead, Sue-Ann. You're a screen reader
Yep.
user too.
Yes. You can with alt text, you can with a screen reader read it word by word, character by character, etc. You just have to use your screen reader, what we call shortcut keys. So you do have that opportunity, that option to read the alt text word for word, FYI.
Okay. And different screen readers behave differently. So Glenn's experience may just be different. But here's the question that I've got for the screen reader users, since we're on this topic. So if I've got a complex chart and it's got a lot of detail in it, and would you prefer that I put that into an alternative text tag for the image, or would you like something basic about, you know, what the chart's about, and then to have most of the detail put in, like, say, a caption? What's more convenient?
So what we do typically with our clients here at WeCo, when they do have images of charts, graphs, complex tables, we do recommend to our clients to have an alternative version. So a text version of that, whether it be a table or some other kind of text alternative, because to convey charts, graphs that have a lot of detailed information, it's really hard to try to convey that within an even it's in a long text format or even a caption. It can be difficult to convey it in those using those options, but without actually just having a complete text alternative option or like via table or some other kind of text version.
So could you give an example of that?
Oh,
What
shoot.
that? I'm sorry, Sue Ann. Sue Ann's not supposed to be presenting tonight. I am, and I'm making her present.
Well, I know in particular when we're talking about tables or just in images of a table or like a graph, depending how the graph is displayed, like visually what it's showing, trying to convey that in a text format, you could certainly do that, within a table format. Again, it's all depending on what the graph is, what the data is showing. You could certainly do a text alternative with headings and tables. So I'm sorry that I don't have an exact example ready for you.
It's okay.
Maureen, do you have any feedback?
Yeah, well, I'm thinking of like, just even in some of our PowerPoint slides for presentations when I'm presenting, like there's one that has a pie chart and it has disabilities and the statistics of the number of people that have that disability. And it just says pie chart and then it says the disability and the percentage and then go down to the next line and it's another disability and the percentage. And, the whole description takes up a small paragraph maybe in space.
Okay. We have any
I was going to add one more thing on the topic is that you're talking about simple pie charts. One of the challenges that also comes in, as I kind of alluded to in my previous comment, is if you have something that's more complex than just a simple data plot, a pie chart, a line plot, a bar chart, if you're dealing with things that are complex data visualizations, for example, there's all sorts of imagery trying to show, say, the United States and all sorts of multivariable data by state on a map, the color, and then there's a chart or something in there, or you do something where there's a mouse over and it shows lots of extra information, or something that gets really different. I mean, it gets into data visualizations back when I was doing UX and things that Edward Tufte would talk about when it's like trying to maximize ink, the data ink and the information that's presented. Those get yourself to challenges. So if they show so much data, and what you're trying to see is, like, they keep talking about flattening the curve right now with COVID. So they show months of data and they've got the plot, but what you would want to hear if you wanted to describe is a little bit of AI or somebody to say, it's like, yes, we look at this, this particular state and it's still on the upswing and it hasn't leveled out. Here it looks like it's leveled out, because that's what a lot of those charts are trying to do. And from a sighted perspective, that's the key information. But the text equivalent for that is usually, it's like, oh yeah, we're going to give you the table, and then it's up to the screen reader user to go through the table and start to perceive what's going to be seen at a glance. But it's like, well, are you flattening the curve? It's like, yes, it seems to have leveled out and it's starting to tail down. The equivalent experience for a screen reader user without something that describes that is going to be table is like reading through the data and then trying to interpret, say, okay, it seems to have gotten here. Okay, it's the same value, and then okay, it's getting lower. But they can't see that quick glimpse of it. Is like, oh, yep. See, because that's one of the problems. When you get to really serious data and lots of it and data visualization.
So a lot of what we dealt with at MnDOT were things that were really, really impossible to encapsulate into something that was easily digestible to the general public. And so one of the things that we wound up doing was, designating perhaps a person in a department working on a particular road project who was familiar with where the road was going through the neighborhood, to be the phone contact when someone who could not see an entire plat map called in and said, can you explain to me where this road's going? Because sometimes that was just the only way. It wasn't going to be able to, it was a big road. It was going through a lot of area. And so sometimes I think that that's a solution that we often talk about with our clients at WeCo, that sometimes you need to be able to have more of a human touch on your approach to accessibility. Whereas we really understand, because we all live with disabilities, that having that ability to get that information independently is really important. Sometimes it is really tough to be able to do that with something that's super detailed.
Well, and I think that's where I was on a website recently, and they had a thing in their accessibility policy on the website that said, if you have questions about something, that's on this website, contact, and then there was a phone number in their accessibility policy. So I think that's one thing that, can really help, is to have an accessibility policy on your website.
That's a good point. Well, since we have some non-visual users on the line tonight,
Did it go well?
I'm wondering if you might be able to offer your biggest alt tag pet peeve and solution.
My biggest
Oh, go ahead, Maureen.
sorry. My biggest pet peeve is when there's an alt tag that doesn't seem to make sense with what's on the website. I'm trying to think of an example of I was reading a website at a college once, and it said there's a lot to do in the Twin Cities, 2 people on a bench. And I thought, that doesn't sound like anything I'd want to do. And then I talked to somebody from the website and found out that, yeah, there were 2 people on a bench, but there was like all these things in the background that you could be doing. And so I guess that's that, or when it just isn't tagged right at all and it just says graphic with a bunch of numbers. That's worse.
So from your standpoint, Maureen, it sounds like if somebody looks at an image before they write an alt tag, think about, if I couldn't see this image, what would I want to know about it?
Yeah. What's the point of it? Like in the college example, the point wasn't that there's people sitting on a bench, but it's that, there's a shopping mall, and there's this and there's that, and there's this park with swans and whatever. So.
Right. And I think that harkens to also being able to convey the emotions of an image sometimes are really important for people to feel included in whatever message is on that page or in that document. It's not always just, don't try to mimic an auto-generated alt tag. Try to put some what do you gain from it when you see it? Maybe it's not just a flower, it's a crocus coming up in the woods that makes you think of spring. How do you convey that? Sue Ann, do you have a pet peeve?
Sure. So we at WeCo, we do a lot of testing, reviewing of clients' websites, and so like Maureen's example about the 2 people sitting on the bench, and what the image or what they were trying to convey with that image is about different things to do at the college. And so we recommend to our clients is that, provide the alt text based upon, it's not the only way to do it, but we just recommend, when they ask us about alt text tags, is to have the alt text describe what you want, or trying to have the photo or the image trying to convey to the user. So in Maureen's example, or for her example, the whole idea was to try to convey to the users that there was plenty of activities to do at the college. So that's kind of a key thing that we tell our clients. But like Maureen, when there isn't any alt text conveyed, and it just uses a series of letters, numbers, and a potential file path URL to the actual image itself that's conveyed via our screen readers when we encounter it. We just encountered a more common issue with alt text is that the clients will be putting the word graphic already in the alt text, and we're like, no, we don't need that, because our screen readers conveys it to us already that it is a graphic or an image on a page based upon the HTML code that is being used. Really quick though, I want to answer a question from Lynn. So he asked in the chat, he asked me what a screen reader I use. I use JAWS 2020, and he asked me what shortcut keys I use to read the alt text descriptions word for word. So Lynn, I have a laptop, so I don't have the number pad on the right hand side. So the shortcut keys I use on my laptop is Control right arrow, Control left arrow, and that's how I can read each word within the alt text.
Okay. All right. Do we have any additional questions or comments?
Yeah, hi. This is Josh Rand. I work for Data Recognition Corporation. I'm a technical writer, so we handle a lot of user guides, things like that. We have contracts with multiple states. So any of our user guides that are displayed on their website have to be compliant and accessible. So I was just kind of wondering how descriptive to get, because a lot of times we're talking about a window in a piece of software where they might be adding permissions or moving things around and things like that, and we explain it in the text, but we're showing the graphic of here's a home page with several tabs and buttons with different functionality. So I was just curious how descriptive, or what, if you had a rule of thumb or what to do, and do you get geographical or locational with that, like like a list of tabs at the top of the screen and then list them out? So I guess that's kind of my question.
Sue Ann, I wonder if you might be better equipped to answer that. If you're not, let me know.
Okay, I'll try to answer, and then okay. Lynn, you could come in after me. But so with that question, I would say, other people who are on here can respond after I do as well. As I mentioned, I think what I would say is that, what are you trying to convey visually in those graphs? So if you're trying to have your users see this stick graphic that has these tabs and these buttons, and I forgot exactly what you said word for word, but I would go with the idea of whatever you're trying to convey visually to your visual users, convey that in text to your non-visual users. Is that helpful?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So like we might show a portal, a picture, like a screenshot of a portal where at the top of the page, it's kind of almost your standard website, and it's just, here you can go and do your permissions. Here you can go and work with this other piece of software. Here you can go and work with that. And we talk about that in the text, in the not the alt text, but we talk
Right.
about it in the actual user guide itself. But then when we show that image, it's basically just an image of that home screen, or it might be of a different piece of the software. Typically, we're already describing,
Okay, I've got you now. I've got it.
Yep.
So in that case, what we would, as long as it's being described in text, what you're conveying in that graphic, we can say that that can be coded to be ignored by assistive technology, because you are conveying the exact same thing in text that you are visually. And I believe the 1.1.1 says, something to the effect of non-visual, I can't remember the exact success criterion wording is, but it basically, it says, if you whatever you have visually, you should have a text alternative version of that. So if that is the case, then you can code those graphics to be hidden, so that way assistive technology like screen readers can just ignore it, since they're not going to get any additional information from the graphic, or it's not going to add any context to from the graphic based upon what they're already going to get from the text itself. Is that helpful?
Yeah, very much so, because
Okay.
we're working with user manuals. They're essentially instruction manuals,
Right.
where we're listing out, step by step what each function, what tab you can do with what. So no, that's very helpful.
Does anybody else want to say anything that I may have gotten wrong, I forgot to mention?
Well, I would just chime in and reinforce what Sue-Ann said by saying there's no need to write the alt tag twice. I think that's what that rule is about. But just to make sure that before you null an image, that you are certain that
Right.
that it truly doesn't need, they're not missing something. Something a non-visual user is missing. But you don't, there is no sense in making the user go through it twice in an alt tag and in the written text below.
Yeah, great, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, well, it's a gorgeous night outside, and social distancing rules have been slightly relaxed to include parks. So we'll do what we can to wrap up while the sun's still shining. These were just a couple of links that I found of resources on the World Wide Web Consortium website that I thought were helpful to me. There's an alt tag decision tree, which reminded me a lot of what we did in MnDOT in the old days before people had all of this protocol. But anyway, if you're working in a group, any way that you can normalize what you do and develop protocols makes it a lot easier for people to be consistent. And then there is a whole series of alt tag tutorials on the World Wide Web Consortium that's available to the public. So please make use of those resources. There are lots of great free resources out there that can help you with this. And that is all I have for this evening. I just want to thank you all for coming and continuing to support accessibility. It has never been more important than it is now. So I hope that you will join us for the free public event for Global Accessibility Awareness Day on May 21st on how to make office experiences, meetings, and promotions accessible to everyone in your audience who lives with a disability. And I will let Andy close this out.
Great.
Thank you so much, Lynn. That was excellent. I just want to touch on some of the things on the screen now. If you ever have any suggestions about a topic that you'd like discussed, if you'd like to present a topic, or if you'd like to be a sponsor for the Accessibility Twin Cities Meetup, feel free to reach out to me either through the Meetup page is a great way, through the messages there, or contact at pr@theweco.com and that will get on to me. Thank you guys so much. The one other thing we did want to ask too is if the time that we're using right now is a good time slot still. I know that when we were meeting at Industrious in downtown Minneapolis, the evening time worked well for people to travel and get there. But now that we're meeting virtually, we wanted to see if this was still a good time or if it was better if we shifted up earlier into the afternoon. If anyone would like to share now, that's fine. Otherwise, sharing through Meetup or through email would be fitting as well.
We're finding we shifted our GAD event to mid-afternoon because we're finding that people with children home have earlier meal times, earlier responsibilities than they did when kids were in daycare, things like that. So if you have a feeling one way or another, let Andy know.
Excellent. Well, I'll get this all wrapped up. We'll share a recording of tonight's broadcast as well as all of the slides in the Meetup event later this evening or tomorrow. And we thank you very much and look forward to seeing you again in the future. Thank you, everyone. And thanks again to our sponsors. Have a great night.